Hollywood's golden age shimmered with perfection. Golden lights, flawless smiles, and love stories that made the world believe in magic. But behind that glittering curtain, there was desire, deception, and forbidden love. Johnny Carson, the man who saw everything from behind his desk, once hinted at the secrets that could have burned Hollywood to the ground. Some of its brightest stars lived double lives, men adored by millions, yet haunted by the truth they could never confess. They laughed on camera and cried behind closed doors. Tonight, we're revealing the 9 legends who risked everything to hide who they truly were. So before we begin, hit subscribe, because these are the stories old Hollywood tried to bury forever. Number 1. Rock Hudson, Hollywood's perfect man with a secret. Rock Hudson wasn't just a movie star, he was the movie star, the man whose face defined desire in the 1950s. 6'4" of charm, confidence, and cinematic perfection. Every woman wanted him, every magazine adored him, and every studio worshipped the image they had created. But behind that polished smile was a man living in quiet agony, trapped in a role far more demanding than any film script. Johnny Carson once said on The Tonight Show, "Rock Hudson could play any part and make you believe it." What the world didn't know was that his greatest performance was pretending to be straight. Behind closed doors, Rock lived cautiously, surrounded by trusted friends who guarded his secret. Studio executives arranged a marriage to erase suspicion, and gossip columnists were paid to stay silent. Hollywood demanded he live a lie. In an era when the truth could end a career overnight, Hudson learned to smile through every question, every rumor, every fabricated headline. But there were whispers about the bachelor parties, the late-night gatherings, the friendships that looked a little too close. When he was diagnosed with AIDS in 1984, the illusion finally shattered. His illness forced the world to confront not just the disease, but the pain of a man who had been forced to hide his love for decades. The night the truth broke, Johnny Carson didn't mock him. He paused, looked down, and said quietly, "Maybe Hollywood's strongest man was just human after all." Rock Hudson died the way he lived, with dignity, mystery, and courage. And for the first time, the mask came off. If you think his story was tragic, wait until you hear about the next star Johnny could never forget. Number 2. Cary Grant, the gentleman who lived behind a perfect smile. Cary Grant was the embodiment of Hollywood elegance, suave, witty, effortlessly magnetic. Every woman dreamed of being on his arm, and every man secretly wanted to be him. But beneath that flawless tuxedo and charming grin was a man living a double life that old Hollywood would never forgive. Johnny Carson once joked, "Cary Grant could charm the truth out of anyone, except himself." Behind the scenes, Grant's truth was carefully hidden behind champagne parties and studio-manufactured romances. His 5 marriages seemed to prove his devotion to women, but those who knew him privately whispered a different story. One involving his long, intimate friendship with fellow actor Randolph Scott. The 2 men lived together for years in a Malibu beach house, sharing breakfast, laughter, and a life far more domestic than the tabloids dared describe. Photographs of the pair lounging shirtless or cooking dinner together were quietly buried by studio executives terrified of scandal. In an era when being exposed could end everything, Cary and Randolph played the world's most delicate game, pretending to be roommates. On The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson once teased him about his charm, asking, "How do you stay so young, Cary?" Grant smiled, looked into the camera, and said, "Happiness, Johnny. Just happiness." But that happiness came at a cost, one measured in secrecy and silence. Even after his death, those who loved him said Cary Grant's greatest performance wasn't in North by Northwest or An Affair to Remember. It was in how perfectly he played himself, because in old Hollywood, the most dangerous thing you could be was honest. Subscribe now. The next name on Johnny's list might just surprise you. Number 3. Randolph Scott, the cowboy who loved in secret. To the public, Randolph Scott was the ultimate man's man. Tall, rugged, stoic. The cowboy every woman dreamed of, the hero who rode off into the sunset with a smirk and a six-shooter. But behind that all-American image was a truth that even Hollywood's brightest lights couldn't hide forever. Johnny Carson once said, "Randolph Scott didn't need to act tough. He was tough." Tough enough to keep a secret that could have ended his career. That secret was his love for another Hollywood legend, Cary Grant. For over a decade, Scott and Grant shared a life together that was far more than friendship. They lived in a Malibu beach house that gossip columns affectionately called Bachelor Hall. But those close to them said it was a real home, one filled with laughter, morning coffee, and quiet tenderness. The pair posed for photographs that were bold for their time, sunbathing together, sharing intimate smiles, cooking side by side. Studio executives panicked, ordering the press to destroy the images. Grant eventually married to protect his career. Scott followed suit. But those who knew them both swore that no woman ever truly came between them. After Grant's passing, Randolph reportedly kept a framed photo of them together, one from the beach house years, on his bedside table. He never spoke publicly about the rumors, never denied, and never confessed. He just smiled that slow cowboy smile, the one that hid more truth than a dozen Hollywood scripts ever could. In Johnny Carson's words, "Some stars shined brightest in secret." And for Randolph Scott, love was his greatest secret of all. Stay tuned. The next story might be even more shocking. Number 4. Montgomery Clift, the beautiful tragedy of Hollywood. Montgomery Clift was the kind of man cameras worshipped. Flawless bone structure, piercing eyes, and a voice that carried both strength and fragility. To audiences, he was the dream, sensitive yet masculine, bold yet broken. But behind that magnetic charm lay a life haunted by secrets, pain, and forbidden love. Johnny Carson once said Monty wasn't acting, he was bleeding on camera. And it was true. Every performance felt like a confession he couldn't make out loud. Clift was known to have deep connections with both men and women, but in the rigid world of Golden Age Hollywood, those truths were locked behind studio doors. His close bond with Elizabeth Taylor was one of the most genuine friendships in film history. She knew everything. Taylor protected him fiercely, even covering for his private struggles and shielding him from gossip that could destroy him. After a devastating car crash in 1956 that left his face permanently scarred, Monty spiraled into addiction and self-destruction. Some said it wasn't the accident that broke him. It was the life he could never fully live. Hollywood adored his beauty, but it was his vulnerability that made him unforgettable. Carson once reflected, "Monty Clift didn't die from his demons. He lived with them too long." When Clift passed away in 1966, alone in his apartment, the autopsy called it natural causes. But those who knew him said it was heartbreak that finally caught up. Montgomery Clift wasn't just a star. He was a mirror of every hidden truth Hollywood tried to erase. And in the silence he left behind, the world finally began to see the man behind the myth. Number 5. James Dean, the rebel who loved in secret. James Dean wasn't just a movie star. He was an idea, the embodiment of youth, rebellion, and dangerous beauty. Every frame he appeared in burned with the kind of energy Hollywood could never quite control. But behind the leather jacket and cigarette was a young man living a secret life that even his fame couldn't protect. Johnny Carson once called him the mystery no one could solve. And maybe that's why America fell so hard for him, because James Dean was never what he seemed. He played the rebel on screen, but off-screen, Dean's rebellion was quieter, against the rigid moral codes of 1950s Hollywood. He was known to have had deep emotional relationships with both men and women, including fellow actors and studio executives who helped him climb the ladder of fame. Friends whispered about private affairs that would have ended his career if they ever reached the tabloids. Marlon Brando once described Dean as a boy trying to love in a world that didn't allow it. And that's what made him so hauntingly real. He carried his truth in every glance, every silence. When he died in that fatal car crash at just 24, the world wept for the rebel who never got to grow old. But those who truly knew him said Dean's greatest act wasn't his roles in Rebel Without a Cause or Giant. It was the quiet courage to be himself in a world that demanded he pretend. Johnny Carson once reflected, James Dean didn't crash because he was reckless. He crashed because he lived fast in a world too slow to understand him. And that's what keeps his legend burning, the beauty of a secret that never truly died. Number 6. George Cukor, Hollywood's invisible king of secrets. He was one of Hollywood's greatest directors, the man behind My Fair Lady, The Philadelphia Story, and A Star Is Born. Yet while his films shaped generations, George Cukor's own story was one that the studio system worked tirelessly to hide. Johnny Carson once hinted, he made every actress shine, maybe because he understood them better than any man ever could. What few dared to say aloud was that George Cukor was quietly, unapologetically gay, decades before Hollywood could even whisper the word. At a time when a man's reputation could vanish overnight, Cukor created a private world behind his mansion gates. His infamous Saturday night parties became legend, filled with the biggest stars in Hollywood, yet wrapped in a code of secrecy. Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy. Many of them attended, but what happened behind those doors stayed locked away from gossip columns. Cukor's brilliance was his disguise. He built his legacy through his female leads. Women like Hepburn and Judy Garland, whom he directed not just with skill, but with understanding. They adored him because he gave them freedom on screen, perhaps the same freedom he longed for in life. But his success came at a cost. Behind the applause, he lived a carefully managed existence, walking the razor's edge between genius and exposure. When Carson once asked, "Why do you never talk about love, George?" Cukor smiled and said, "Because some love stories aren't meant for daylight." Even now, his name shines in Hollywood history. A man who transformed film, directed legends, and loved in shadows brighter than any spotlight. The golden age of Hollywood, glamorous, untouchable, and bursting with secrets the cameras were never meant to see. Behind the tuxedos and satin gowns lived men and women who carried forbidden truths in their hearts. They loved in silence, hid behind scripts, and acted off-screen more than they ever did in front of it. Johnny Carson saw it all from his desk. The smiles that hid heartbreak, the scandals whispered in dressing rooms, and the quiet courage of stars who refused to conform. And maybe that's why their stories still haunt us, because their greatest performances weren't for an audience, they were for survival. If you made it this far, you're one of us, a seeker of Hollywood's forbidden truths. So hit subscribe now, because every week we dig deeper into the stories they tried to bury, the scandals, the seduction, and the secrets that shaped the stars we thought we knew. This isn't just about fame. It's about the price they paid for it.